Welcome to the Bloody Broads Pod, and we are your Bloody Broads. I'm Bhavna Sharma.
And I'm Jamie Howard. We're your horror guides from page to screen and everything in between.
We're going to be covering The Shining. We're going to be diving deep into it, deeper than probably most of the podcasts you've probably heard, because we're just going to do it all. We're that ambitious.
We're going to be that guy that corners you at a party and tells you every detail of his Dungeons and Dragons campaign, except this is our, we're doing book, we're doing movie, we're doing theories, we're doing room 237, aka it's actually room 217. We're hitting it all.
Yep, we've got it all covered, or at least the best to our abilities, and let's just kick it off. Let's go.
Perfect. So this was 1980, correct?
The movie, yeah.
Yeah, book was 1977. Yeah. Infamously directed by Stanley Kubrick. To some, I wish you guys could see the face that Bhavna just made. To some mixed, stories on set. And just to condense the plot down to as small as we possibly can, Jack Torrance is a English teacher who is now out of work and looking for a retreat to write his book. He applies at the Overlook Hotel to be a caretaker. They go on a family vacation where they get snowed in, and then all hell breaks loose.
Cue the National Lampoon theme song.
Also right out the gate, I don't really sound like myself this week. I was on vocal rest all week and have still not 100% recovered, but I was just too excited to talk about this, especially with you, because so that's kind of how this all got started, you guys, is that one day I tweeted and I was like, I really just need to talk about The Shining as a metaphor for like generational alcoholism and generational curses. I don't even remember like what I said in the thread. And then
something like that.
Yeah. And then Bhavna DM'd me and was like, so can we do this?
Because I could talk about this for hours, as you guys will very well see.
Yeah. And okay, so I want you to like follow up too, because I have my initial thoughts. Just my first note, I love the movie and the book in completely different ways. If I had to pick one, I'm always going to say book. That's just how it is. But the movie is good when I want to throw something on that A, I've seen before, and B, I love showing it to people who've never seen it before. And it's good for kind of like an introspective mood, but the book is when you want to be completely engrossed into something. And there's just no way, there's no way they could have covered all the details in the movie that they go into in the book.
Yep. And for me, I love both of them, again, for two different reasons. I treat the book and the movie like how I treat the Harry Potter films and the movie, is I look at them as two completely separate entities. Because if I'm going to look at it as an adaptation, I'm going to lose my goddamn mind.
I will literally jump through a window.
Let's not bring up Hermione's dress color. So, but I treat them as two separate things. The book, I honestly find far more scary. It's given me more nightmares than the movie has overall, even though I first watched the movie when I was 4 and I really shouldn't have.
Oh my God.
The woman in the tub still haunts my. Yeah. We had one of those movie channels. We had cable in our building, and we had one of those movie channels, and everybody else was asleep, and this is when our TV was just in the living room, not there wasn't one there's one in my parents' bedroom, there's one in the living room, and I couldn't sleep, so I went, 4-year-old me got out of bed, went to the living room, turned on the TV, and whoever was watching TV last had it on the movie channel, and it was that, and it was right before the infamous room 217 woman come out of the tub, and for some reason I was terrified but couldn't move. But
mine wasn't quite so early, but also that's like your villain origin story.
Yeah. It didn't kill me, it made me stronger. But yeah, basically if you want more spooks, I'd rather read the book, because the Stephen King may take a long time to tell you a story, but there's a reason for everything he tells you.
Yeah, I mean, let's just address that from the jump, right? Like, it's so funny because as much as Stephen King hated Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of this, and as much as Stanley Kubrick could give two shits what Stephen King thought, like, their process is not actually all that dissimilar.
No.
I mean, like, months and months and months of production. I think it took them almost a year to film the movie adaptation, and it took Stephen King quite a while to, write, edit, all that stuff. And it's one of his longer books. And
we haven't covered it yet.
Yeah, I know. Oh my gosh, just wait. But to me, it's always really interesting because people have such a visceral reaction to both, but especially the movie. Like, people say, oh, it's not scary. And I was like, okay, like, clearly you've had some kind of like charmed life when this movie is not scary to you.
Yeah, like, even rewatching it in preparation for this, like, there were definitely some scenes that still scare me, but I find, which I'll dive into a little bit later, some I found more scary as an adult for very different reasons than when I did when I was a kid. Like, there's different scenes that I found scary, and that just ties into being an adult in this day and age.
I mean, that's so real. And we're obviously, content warning, you guys, we're going to talk about things like COVID and how it ties in, and quarantine, how it ties into this. Yep. Subliminal messages that people have theories on that are sexual in nature, things like that. So maybe don't listen to this entire podcast with your children.
and addiction as well.
Lots of addiction. Yeah. I have thoughts on that.
Yes.
But it's so funny that you say that as an adult, because that's something I really wanted to kind of talk about from the kickoff, is that to me, when people are like, oh, this isn't scary, horror for me isn't necessarily about whether I was scared, but if I was like if I had a sense of dread. And to me, those are two very different things. So, if you've listened to me talk on Clubhouse, or if you've talked to me about horror stuff in real life, what I'm about to say, you've heard me say 100 times. But horror for me is, I call it the inevitable. Like, we know the killer gets the kids in the cabin. We know in this situation, if you've never seen this, spoiler, Jack murders his family. Like, we know that's going to happen. And to me, I'm doing air quotes, fun is kind of seeing the journey, how we get there, but it's always the same destination. So just like how some people love rom-coms because the people always end up together, we love horror because someone's always going to die or get possessed or who knows what. But
the ones where everyone lives are just boring.
Right? Like, I didn't come here. Listen, y'all know I say this all the time, that slasher is my favorite genre. If somebody has a big knife and there are people running from the big bad with a knife, and then I'm sold.
And you get plenty of that in this one as well, just as like a bonus feature. So this could count as a slasher film.
Oh, we definitely are going to have to, we're going to put that as a poll on the socials, you guys.
Yes.
Is The Shining a slasher? Fight amongst yourselves.
Yes. Figure it out. Let us know.
Yeah. So to kind of keep talking about, like, just the production and stuff. So right before he made this, and it's well known again that Stephen King hated this adaptation, Kubrick was reading books on subliminal sexual messaging and advertisement. And so he went to the advertisers who like wrote those ads, and he would study their technique to mimic it in this movie. So one of the big ones that someone pointed out to me the very first time I watched this as a teenager, and now I go back and I'm like, oh my God. Jack, when we first like see Jack actually in the lobby right before he meets his boss and all the other employees, he's reading a Playgirl in the middle of the day, in the middle of the like Overlook hotel lobby. He's reading a Playgirl, but he never like flashes us the full cover. He just folds it up, sets it down, and then goes and talks. Yeah.
I never noticed that. I mean, I know he was reading a magazine. I just didn't know what he was reading. Wow.
Yeah, and there's stuff like we can get into this.
The poster above Dick Halloran's bed is just of a fully nude woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are not so subtle
No,
instances,
the woman in
but
the tub.
right. But things like how the alcohol settled around the ice in the glass. Like he used it from alcohol ads in the 70s, which I
Oh.
found really interesting. Um, and I also love that right off the bat, when we're driving, we get like, as they're driving up the mountain, we get the
Mm-hmm.
ominous music.
Yeah.
Like it's family home video, like vacation video.
And almost as if you're driving the point home, they're talking about the Donner Party, as if that wasn't creepy enough. And then you have Jack Nicholson, who's just an inherently creepy individual. Like, I don't think he can act to not be creepy. Like, I think he just leans into it. And it just was like, yeah, we're going to get into his acting a little bit later. But yeah, like, it was very, like, he had a very tense, like, I'm gonna fucking kill you kind of vibe it, like
Yes.
right off the bat. Like, I'm gonna fucking kill you.
And what's so funny to me is that if that shot as they're like driving up the mountain today would be a cheap like drone shot that gets used in so many modern horror movies, where the drone comes up over the car winding down the road, and you know, we're the hot teenagers going to the cabin in the woods, or we're the couple fighting trying to repair our marriage going on a retreat or whatever. Like
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And everybody talks about it. So let's just get right into it too.
Okay.
The window in Dr. Ullman's office. This is okay. We're going to spend
impossible.
a lot of time. Yeah. We're going to spend a lot of time bringing this up, you guys, but there are so many quote unquote impossibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's impossible to have his window.
Yep.
And to skip ahead just a little, because I love to point this out, and you like, so as Bhavna was rewatching, I'm getting like live texts that are killing me, cracking me up. She was like, the TV is battery powered, question mark. Those definitely did not exist in like 77 to 80. Not to, I mean, I wasn't alive, so I don't know, but.
No, like I remember having a less fancy version of the TV that Wendy had in the kitchen. So Wendy's in the kitchen, she's preparing a meal. This was supposed to be showing us them just settling into their stuff about a month in or whatever. So she's got the TV on in the kitchen. And growing up, I had a similar TV, and I grew up in the 90s. So I was born in the 80s, brought up in the 90s, and we had a little black and white antenna little TV that only brought up local channels. What up, Batman the animated series? But but we would have it on our dinner table, like, so you know, the Cash and News, or for whatever reason we just had it, and you needed a plug.
Yeah.
And this was like 1992, 1993. You needed a plug for that stuff. And so and it was a brand new TV at that point. So it was like, if she's using a similar TV in let's just call it 1979 to go even, you know, then like, what's battery powered at that point? Are boomboxes even better? Or do boomboxes exist? I don't know.
Boomboxes don't even exist.
Like, are they just on the precipice of being invented? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, and I think that's something that draws so many of us who do love the book more, who prefer the book, into the movie, because not only do we have the impossible window of Dr. Ullman's office, like the layout of the hotel would not allow there to be a ground floor window in his office. We get things like the TV. We get things, to me, something that always stood out is how the swipes, like how Kubrick uses a lot of swipes and fades, they disorient us just as much as the other, like the actual story itself.
And fun fact, there's an explanation for all of that. A huge influence on this movie was The Last Year at Marienbad. It's a French New Wave movie from 1961. Check it out if you have the time. If you don't, you've already seen The Shining, so you've basically already seen the movie. But to give you a brief overview of that movie, it's essentially an impossible movie. And the plot is, this woman is at this fancy Versailles-esque resort, where she is with one man. I forgot what his character was called, but I think it's like Mr. X or something. And then time and layout of the place is completely disorienting. There's different like swipes and fades to like disorient you, like Jamie just said for The Shining, but it was from this movie. And they also had little placards that had like the time, like what, like, you know, next year, or much time later or something like that. Like, so you don't really know. So like in The Shining, it's things like Monday or like,
But they never
you
tell
know,
us like they've been there for 2 weeks or whatever. It's just like
yeah,
it's
you
a
only
Wednesday
know
at
because of
3:30.
the snow, or that
Yeah.
it's like context clues on the radio, like, you know, it's past Christmas or whatever from Dick Halloran. And where I was going with this. Yes. So like you don't even know who the characters really are. You don't know when they are that, and it kind of lends to like all the oopy spoopy in The Shining, where it's almost like the ghosts are layered, as opposed, and they'll exist at the same time, as opposed to like, you know, when like, oh, is this a ghost from the 60s? Is this a ghost from like the 50s, the 20s? And also ties into the whole caretaker, you were always the caretaker, you were always here,
Hmm.
thing, little context clues like that. And again, obviously the infamous photo at the end
Oh
of
my
the
gosh.
movie.
Yeah. And we can talk about that for quite a bit when we get there.
Yeah.
Because much like The Shining, you guys, we're not going to go in order.
No.
What really gets me though is that it's a prison of our own making.
Hmm.
So they decide to get snowed in. We, as an, like, they accept that responsibility. We, as an audience, have to, suspension of disbelief. We have to give ourselves over to the film, to the story, to the characters. And you're like, all right, strap in. We're on this ride now. And something that I think takes away from that point is something that gets brought up for several chapters in the book, but not at all in the movie,
Hmm.
is the whole reason that Jack had to leave teaching. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Let's dive into that since we're on it already. Like,
yeah. I mean,
this
he
is,
gets,
yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I mean, he gets, he punches a student who he's
Hmm.
had problems with, which, like, shout out all my teacher friends. I know y'all been there. You wanted to, but you didn't. So good for you.
Yep.
But you can't, so the whole reason that Jack even can't even teach anymore is because he literally physically assaults a student for screwing with his car
Hmm.
after telling the kid, like, hey, you can't do the debate team, like you didn't make the grades or whatever.
Yep. And not only that, but you don't get the full context either of like him being an alcoholic in that sense as well. Like that's part
Yeah.
of the reason why he ups and goes. Like you don't get the whole context of his marriage essentially being over, and this was like the last literal straw that he had to make it better, because I feel like in the movie you kind of get the idea that they're okay, that he occasionally is like mean to Danny, or like he like did the one thing with his arm that they're super vague about, which they're not super vague about
In the book.
in the book at all. I feel like because you're missing out on a lot of this core setup, it's not as terrifying as it could have been. And it makes it more of a shallow experience. It's still a fun and scary experience for different reasons, but you're not getting the full blown punch to the face, can't sleep at night
Right.
effect.
And for me, it's no secret for people who've heard me speak about this before, but
Mm-hmm.
for me, the idea that when it all boils down to it, when you take away the supernatural stuff, what's just actually occurring, it's alcoholism that's haunting the family. It's their choices. And in the book, we get to hear about, before they had Danny, what was going on with Jack. And like,
Mm-hmm.
really, because in the movie, I even have it in my notes. I was like, God, Jack is just such an asshole to Wendy. Because she asks some like very sweet, like innocent question about like, oh, what room are we in or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes off on her for no reason. And
Absolutely none.
oh my God. And the
And
way
then,
he talks about her,
mm-hmm.
I will say, when he tells Mr. Ullman, he goes, my wife's a confirmed ghost story and horror film fanatic. I was like,
Yeah.
same girl. I feel you.
Same. But back to your point about her saying something sweet and him going off on her, like that's also like you don't get the context of like her saying, "Hey, maybe like I forgot what the exact line was, but she's like, "Okay, well maybe I'll go make you a snack and when I come back like you'll let me read some." There's a whole thing about how she was also an English major, like the way that she made money during this time was like she was editing a bunch of stuff for him and his professor while he was teaching, and like a whole bunch of other things. Like she was doing that kind of stuff on the side. Like she's an academic herself.
And what
So,
kills, yes, it kills me that we don't get that in the movie, because again, context is everything. And there's levels to this, y'all. The big thing for me that really gets driven home is that change is coming at the sacrifice of the child. So they don't acknowledge there's a big issue until the child is seriously injured or they stand up for themselves. And for anyone that's ever had to deal with an addict of any kind, but especially if it was your parent or your caretaker, that's just such a familiar thread to follow. I mean, you know, you're yelling fire in a theater and no one listens to you until it's their seat that's too hot to sit in anymore. So we don't get that in the movie. We just think, oh, he's a man of the times. He's a macho, you know, whatever. Like he's a professor, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and it only adds to make Wendy look more like a gaslit figure or more of a hysterical figure. Like, for example, when Danny shows up all fucked up from the ghost encounter that he had, and she immediately goes like, you did this, like you did it, you know, blah blah blah. Like it makes anyone that doesn't know the actual history, someone that just goes into the movie blind, they're gonna think, is she nuts? Like the hell? And like, why is she only gonna blame him because he had that dream that he said that he hurt the kid? Or like, has he actually hurt the kid before? Like, what's going on? Which you don't find out till much later when he's having the scene with Lloyd, where he vaguely mentions, you know, he roughed Danny up after, you know, he spilled his papers or whatever. And it's just like, as a woman, made me big mad, basically. To be like, you know, not even just knowing what I know about Shelley Duvall and her time on set.
Oh God,
like
yeah.
That aside, it's more like this character is so strong in the book. Like she is a strong woman. She knows what she wants. She chose to be with Jack. She like knew exactly what he was. She gave him an ultimatum. She said like, hey, like we're getting a divorce, and he's just like, give me 2 weeks. He sobers up, and the time's just like, you know, it just tacks on and tacks on. But he's only been sober for, I forget how long they mentioned, like just a couple of months, right? Like I forget if that was the book or the movie, but it was only a couple months. It wasn't even a year yet.
No, and we get them in this very volatile setting. I mean, you know, let's be real. The eating canned food for 5 months is the real horror in this situation. Every time they walk through that kitchen, I'm like, oh, woof. Like the food in the 70s, like late 70s, early 80s. No, but I mean, seriously, it's this idea, again, it's a prison of our own making. It's like, what do we accept? Like, what ghosts are we willing to let haunt our current space? And I think that gets brought up a lot with things not feeling real, things not feeling, she's like, oh, that's not, like, Jack would never do that. And then I mean, it ties perfectly into the way Shelley Duvall got treated on set. And that's an iconic story. We don't have to get too deep into it, but he was not, Stanley Kubrick was not a nice person to her, to put that very, very lightly. And then, you know, she was never really the same after she filmed it. And I think especially as women, especially in this age, we're so used to being told like, oh, you're being hysterical. It's not going to get that bad. You know, it's okay if he gets elected president. Like, oh, you guys.
But that's a whole different podcast.
So we get introduced to all the main characters, which is great. They do a great job of showing that in the movie. And then we realize, and I don't realize this until my second watch when I'm like 15 or 16. The first time I see it, I'm like 13. It comes on, you know, AMC does like the 31 Days of Halloween and all that good stuff. Yeah. The second time I watch it, I have my brother who is a couple years older than me. His friend was over and he was like, oh, you know that their apartment can't be laid out like that. And I was like, 15-year-old me was like, mind blown. So that's another, like it's another impossibility. And it occurred, like watching it, I just rewatched it last week. And I had reread it back in March, and I'm like, oh my God, this literally cannot exist. And it's another idea of, we've built this fallacy, we've built this fantasy, this marriage that's, oh, it's fine, even though he drinks a lot, and like, oh, their relationship is fine, even though he broke my son's arm. We've built this fake world that we're living in and that we're willingly putting ourselves in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just a note on that apartment too. Like, if you really pay attention to it, it almost looks like a cheaper production value than the actual hotel. Like, that's always stuck out to me. From the first time like, not maybe not the first time I watched it, but the first time I watched it, like with brain cells, and every consequent viewing. Yeah,
you were a 4-year-old baby genius, just absorbing all the Stanley Kubrick nonsense.
Haven't even picked up an R.L. Stein book at that point yet. I know all of this. Christopher Pike, not even on my radar. Nancy Drew, who is she? But no, like, if you pay, like, it looks like a set.
That was literally in my notes. I was like, this looks like the set of a sitcom. And in that time period, sitcoms had kind of just become more, they had shifted away from things like I Love Lucy and Leave It to Beaver. And we had, Three's Company. We had, oh my gosh, the Waltons. I'm trying to think of the theme song.
The Jeffersons?
Like, there we go.
At that time? Yeah.
I was going to say, I was trying to think of the theme song. It's like moving on up, because I'm not about to sing on this for you guys when my voice sounds like this. It's this idea of the family's okay. Like, we're fine. Look at this. We have cherry yellow paint, which like is also an allusion to, other things.
And to also add to like I guess if you want to dive into a more dreary theme, it's almost as if like
always.
It's almost as if like the family's the illusion and everything going on in the hotel is real. Blew your mind on a Sunday.
You guys can't see what the face that I just made, but I just leaned all the way back in my office chair because it's no secret, like, I love Mike Flanagan. Like, that's part of the reason we decided to start with The Shining. We're both like holding up hard hands because this is it makes perfect sense to me that he did Dr. Sleep and Hill House, because to me, Hill House is kind of like a spiritual, a spiritual continuation of the themes that show up in The Shining. And we'll talk about that in its own episode.
Yeah.
But there are elements of the fantastical that it occurs to me after the fact. And I'm a huge paranormal nerd, where it aligns more closely with the theory of like a multiverse versus a traditional haunting. So to take a quick detour into the paranormal, as it were, because we're both fans. Yes. There's all these different themes of hauntings, like, or categories, I should say. Like, one is the intelligent haunting. That's like what they're trying to capture on like all the ghost shows, where it responds to you and it knows it's there and it's interacting with you. There's the stone tape theory style of haunting, where it's just a repetitive, the
like
stair creaks. Yeah, thank you. It's the stair creaks every night at 3:30 in the morning. But then there's also the theory that when we see a ghost, we're actually a ghost to the ghost, because we're experiencing time as an overlap. I mean, the string theory of the universe, that everything's happening at once. And
kind of like the others.
There we go. Yes. You guys, Bhavna's going to be able
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. You're going to be able to give them much more condensed versions of my theories, because I'm pretty sure I was like an old like storyteller from Greek times in my past life. But the thing that we get so much of this movie that we thankfully do get in the book, like one thing that did carry on, is the levels of quote unquote ghosts and perceptions that are happening all at once, and we're experiencing all at once, even though if we were looking at it from a macro point of view, linearly, that's even a word, it's all spread out.
It is now.
Yeah. But we're experiencing it all at once because they're snowed in and they're trapped, and again, prison of their own making.
Yeah. And since we're on this detour of the paranormal, and I know we were going to cover this at some point, but this seems like just a really good segue. Let's talk about The Shine.
Perfect. Because here is where we get into things with Stephen King that are not necessarily correct for how we view things today. And I'm very aware of it.
Yeah,
you know,
we both are.
Yeah, we have problematic faves. But when you Google search the magical Negro stereotype, a picture of Dick Halloran literally pops up in like the top results.
And this makes me sad for so many reasons, because Dick Halloran in the book, not so much.
No, he's really not. And that's what I think kills me, is that people have a perception of the movie, and then when they go to read, to me, again, Stanley Kubrick, fight me. Like, it should not have been condensed. And, you know, they made a whole show about it. They made That's So Raven a show. Like,
yeah. And, like, the thing, too, is that, well, since we're going to talk about Dick Halloran, aka probably one of my favorite Stephen King characters.
Oh, hands down. Hands down. Yeah.
Fun fact, he shows up in It, and he's a part of the town's history at some point, which is probably one of my favorite chapters in that book too, but that's a side point. But I felt like, so in the book, just to give some people some context, there's a character called Watson. And he was like, he's a curmudgeon. He's like his great grandfather actually was one of the founders of the Overlook, and like, or his great grandfather or something like that, to that extent. Like, he's basically got all the stories. He's got all the stories about the place, like all the people that have killed themselves, blah blah blah. And then he gets into the boiler room, which we will talk about later. Yes, yep. Jamie just made the face that
so mad that's not in the movie. I'm so mad.
Me too. But you know, he's basically your exposition guide, not Dick Halloran. So the way that Kubrick made Dick Halloran him and Ullman your exposition, like, you know, your shamans, as they were, of the hotel. He kind of really downplayed both of their characters, and more so Dick, because in the book, Dick is very much supposed to be Danny's guide. So the way they had Dick just kind of do everything all at once in the film, it didn't really make sense that he could hear Danny, or that Danny called out to him. Like, there wasn't too much of a bond.
No, and we lose their bond.
Yeah.
We also lose a lot of backstory with him.
Yeah.
Because and I'm gonna skip a little bit ahead. It is forever one of my biggest gripes with the movie that he does not survive when he survives in the book.
Yep.
I will never forgive that. Like, they take away his agency. They take away, not just at the end of the movie, but throughout the whole story. He introduces Danny to the Shine. He literally talks to him about, like, hey, I hear and feel these things. I know you hear and feel these things. He literally explains to Danny the stone tape theory that we talked about earlier, that there's just a trace that gets left behind of people, and some people can see it and some people can't. It really gets me that he was reduced to this character, this trope, when he was in the book such a pivotal thing. He was such a pivotal character, such a pivotal part of the story.
Yep. And he's not just pivotal in this story, he's pivotal in Dr. Sleep as well, which Mike Flanagan, when we get to that episode, will explain how he did a really good cleanup job in general.
Listen. So, I mean, it's what made so much of it watchable, to be honest.
Yeah, it really did. But Dick and Danny's, which is, say that 3 times fast.
That sounds like one of those restaurants where they're like mean to you on purpose.
Yeah. But their vibe is just so different in the film versus the book. And you can probably pin some of that on like the child actor, or, you know, or again, the magical Negro stereotype that Kubrick obviously had him play up. Like, you know, that there was some direction put into that.
100%.
But it just comes off as more vile and foreboding. Yeah. Like, I am the last person that'll jump to like somebody be like, that's kind of pedo, like, whatever.
Yeah.
But like, when you compare the two, he comes across in the book as someone warm and caring and genuinely caring, and like, um to the point where he takes this kid into his car to talk to him, and like
And
the
tell
parents
him,
are a little off, so he does acknowledge that it could be that, like, to outside eyes, but like gets the kid to actually open up to him, and like gets to, like, he comforts him. He tells him he's not alone. Like, he's been dealing with this his whole life. He had his grandmother, and then he's also saying that Danny is the most powerful one he's come across, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, things like that. And like, basically, if you need me, call me, you know how to get me, type of
call
a
me, beat me
situation.
if you want to reach me.
do, 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 do. So, but anyway, like, it just, I understand in a film you have to cut a lot of things down. You have to, uh, meld characters. You have to, speed up exposition, et cetera, et cetera. But that they could have done, because it took the exact same amount of time that they spent in the book, they spent in the film. So they really could have made that a thing, like,
100%, 100%.
and don't tell me the actors couldn't do it. The actors could do it.
Okay, so to segue into the other character that I feel like, and I know you have a lot of thoughts on this, and I'm very excited to hear you go off about it.
Okay.
So we get Dick and we get Lloyd, and I'm gonna loop back around to this, but I feel like there's this whole theory that Lloyd is just Jack's subconscious, Lloyd the bartender, and that's just Jack's subconscious telling him like, well, it's okay to drink, my dude. But as soon as after we get them settled in, to go back to the plot, we get them settled in. He meets Dick Halloran. They walk him through, he gives Wendy and Danny the tour. Again, another impossible moment, because the kitchen can't be laid out like that, the way they walk in and out of the storage room.
Yep. And where it's placed and blah, blah, blah.
Right, where it's placed in the hotel. We get Dick having his "That's So Raven" moment in bed, and he sees kind of Danny having a vision from his hotel room in Miami, and he knows like, okay, I need to be on red alert. Like, my signal has to be open to receive messages from this little boy. Yeah. Shortly after this in the movie, but several chapters later in the actual book, we get our first glimpse of the infamous Lady in the Tub, and it is too bad that M. Night Shyamalan did not write this one.
What a twist.
Yeah, this one did not look the way that it was presented in the book, this version of the lady. It feels like, again, Kubrick just wanted sexy. He had been studying those advertisers that were putting in subliminal sexual messages, of the rest of the story. And now we get what's supposed to be, to me, a symbol of time marching on, decay, wasted potential, wasted sort of drive and focus and desire almost. Instead of that, like this grotesque figure with like skin coming off of her, the first time we see the Lady in the Tub, she's a pinup model. She's, she looks like a 70s Hooters ad, although I don't think Hooters was around then.
And sorry, my mic just decided to do some things there.
You're good. You're good.
It definitely did not happen like that in the book at all. And sorry, I need to collect myself for a moment, because that part just makes me so angry. I wish you could see my face right now.
Well, that's the other thing is like, we're willing to work with adaptations, especially with Stephen King, because he's so detailed in his books. We're willing to accept some things being cut out, but to take a figure that is so symbolic in the book and turn her into a smut moment, to me, is just like, you've got to be shitting me. Like,
like the whole thing. So the whole thing in the book is that this is back to Watson, the character I was mentioning earlier, the curmudgeon caretaker man that's like, I'm fucking off for the summer. Or the winter, or whatever it is. Bye. He actually is the one to tell Jack the story of the lady in room 217,
Right.
as it were. And like he has this whole story. She has this whole story, which if you watch the film, doesn't make any sense. It makes sense to her final form, but not
But
her 70s pinup model form.
yes.
So
And she has like full bush. Like
she has,
she is.
yeah,
I was like, what is this?
what is it? So then, whatchamacallit. So in the book, long story short, she is the elderly whatever wife of a New York lawyer. They both have a very weird relationship. They both come up to the Overlook every year. They always get that room. That's their room. And then one night he gets bombed and drives away, and she just comes. I forget what she says, but she basically makes herself known that night. And then she ends up taking a whole bunch of sleeping pills and drowning in the tub.
Yeah.
That's how she dies. And he comes back, and they kind of like the next day or whatever, and they blame him. There's a whole big thing. It made news because, whatever. And then Ullman was actually the one to talk him down. That was the whole point of telling the story, was to show how Ullman really earned his paycheck. They mentioned that a lot in the book, that he really earns his paycheck because he's good at de-escalating situations and talking people down.
I have several notes on the futility of labor coming up. So
I figured you would, as soon as I figured out that he was that kind of a guy.
Yep.
But that was the whole point of them telling the story, was because of that. And then that to also point out that later when Danny does go to room 217, because it is open, he is a kid, he is curious, even though he was told in the book too by Dick, stay the fuck away.
Sorry, you guys, Bhavna has her notebook and is like thumping it like she's a holy roller Baptist preacher at a revival, like preaching the gospel of Uncle Stephen. Like that's how we feel about Stephen King.
Revival by Stephen King, another podcast episode coming to you.
Coming soon.
But soon.
But oh my gosh, sorry, I'm still coming off this cold, so I'm gonna cough when I laugh. But that's what really, no pun intended, kills me about, again, it's taking agency away from women. Wendy becomes a micro version of herself. We lose why this woman is in room 217 and why she killed herself anyways, or the fact that she killed herself. We turn her into a sex symbol. Like we don't have it. There's so many moments in this that are so insanely misogynistic where I'm like, wow, if I had only seen the movie and not read the book, I would probably think Stephen King is like worse than he actually is.
Agreed. Like, because that scene, I don't know, like, yeah, it terrified me as a kid. It did scar me a little bit as a kid. And I think it was more so because she was naked. I don't know if that's an Indian thing, but
no, listen,
like,
as someone,
and the shame and the
whatnot. I was raised extremely, for those in the United States, Southern Baptist. And so growing up, it definitely, I was like, oh no, boobies, like no, and it's a shame of our body. And that's why people harp on the idea of the, again, the sexual in this. And I hate to keep like,
no, it's a common theme.
It's a common theme. Like it's, there's the whole documentary Room 237, and we'll talk about this more later. But one of the people that are featured in that documentary, they think it's about Danny being sexually abused.
Yeah.
And, it's adults who are not proper with children. And it's a loss of innocence. And I think that's something we can all relate to, whether it was sexual or not, like that moment where we lose our innocence, where we realize, life is not what our parents told us.
Yeah.
Maybe we hear it from our parents, which is even worse.
Which honestly is another casualty of the book in the movie is Danny and Jack's relationship.
Yes.
Danny and Jack's relationship in the book is, for lack of a better word, pretty wholesome, except for that one time where he was drunk and therefore got really pissed and I think he broke his arm or something like that.
He breaks his arm.
He breaks his arm. Yeah.
And right before that, Danny had been waiting for him in the driveway to come home. Like Danny was so excited. He sat outside all day to see Daddy, and like there was no threat the way that Jack Nicholson is threatening in this movie. I mean, as soon as Danny comes in from seeing the lady in the tub, he immediately gaslights Wendy and Danny about the lady in the bathroom and Danny's neck. He's like,
Yeah.
that there's no way that could happen, and I didn't do this. And it's all this is all you guys being hysterical because we're here alone for 5 months.
Yeah. And like in the book too, Wendy had a little bit more of a, like, she was a little more wary about leaving them alone together, but that was after the initial incident, which was way before he even got this job. By then, he, like you said, he was waiting in the driveway for him to come home. He was helping him with the groceries. Hell, they even went on like a errand together so he could make a phone call, because he didn't want to make the call from home because of 70s and, and phone bills.
All those collect fees.
Yeah. But, things like that, like you didn't get a sinister vibe off the two of them. You didn't get that sinister vibe until he was way down the rabbit hole in that hotel.
And it also links up with how we don't get an animated hedge maze in the movie that we get in the book.
Yep.
And I'm going to put a pin in to come back to later.
Yeah. We will definitely talk about that later. Like everything else, apparently.